Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
Life in our once tranquil neighborhood took a twisted turn when a local troublemaker decided to stir up chaos, and I found myself at the center of it all. Let me tell you about the absolute mess that unfolded in our HOA over the past few months. It all started when this guy, let's call him Fred, decided he wanted to join our board of directors. Now, Fred isn't exactly what you'd call an upstanding citizen. He's got a rap sheet longer than my arm, including armed robbery back in the 90s and a whole bunch of recent DWIs and domestic violence charges. Not exactly the kind of guy you want making decisions for the community, right? So anyway, Fred gets this bright idea to start his own new HOA board. He rounds up a few other troublemakers and claims they held some meeting where they got the required 5% of homeowners to nominate this new board. The whole thing sounded fishy from the start. I mean, none of us regular folks even heard about this supposed meeting. When word started getting around about what Fred was up to, people were not happy. I'm talking angry phone calls, heated conversations at the mailboxes, the works. Nobody wanted this guy anywhere near a position of power in our neighborhood. But Fred, being the charmer he is, just doubled down. Things really started to get out of hand when Fred decided the rules didn't apply to him. He kept coming onto my property and my neighbors' properties, claiming there were easements along our gravel road. Mind you, we've all checked our plats, and there are no such easements. But try telling that to Fred. He'd show up at all hours, wandering around like he owned the place. I tried talking to him about it at first, neighbor to neighbor, trying to keep things civil. But it was like talking to a brick wall. He'd just get all worked up and start cussing. One time, he went off on my wife when she asked him to leave our yard. I was this close to calling the cops, but I didn't want to escalate things. My neighbor across the street had it even worse. Fred kept driving across their front lawn, tearing it all up. They put down some big rocks to stop him, and you know what that nutjob did? He called the police on them. Can you believe it? As if they were the ones in the wrong for protecting their own property. It got to the point where we were all on edge. You'd be out mowing the lawn or getting the mail, always looking over your shoulder in case Fred showed up. We started warning each other when we'd spot him skulking around. It was like living in a bad neighborhood watch movie or something. Now, you'd think with all this going on, people would see right through Fred's bid for the HOA board. But he's got this way of smooth-talking some folks. He managed to convince a few people that he was just misunderstood and wanted to make positive changes in the community. Yeah, right. The current board was in a tough spot. On one hand, they didn't want to discriminate against someone for past mistakes. But on the other hand, this guy was clearly bad news. We found out that in Virginia, felons can't even vote, let alone serve on an HOA board. Plus, our bylaws have this clause about board members needing to be upstanding citizens. I don't know about you, but multiple DWIs and domestic violence charges don't exactly scream upstanding to me. Things really took a turn for the weird when we discovered someone had put up a camera near the neighborhood bus stop. At first, we thought it might be for safety reasons, but then we found out it was probably Fred or one of his cronies. They were trying to catch people taking down their signs advertising their so-called new HOA meeting. Talk about paranoid. I gotta tell you, it's been exhausting dealing with all this. Every day brings some new Fred-related drama. Just last week, I caught him out there with a measuring tape, acting like he was surveying my property line. I asked him what he thought he was doing, and he went off on this long rant about how the gravel road was actually a public right-of-way. Never mind that Virginia DOT and the electric company have already signed off on our fence plans. Speaking of the fence, that's been another whole ordeal. We decided to put one up, partly to keep Fred off our property. You should have seen the fit he threw when we started construction. He was out there taking pictures, threatening to sue, the whole 9 yards. But we've got all our paperwork in order, so let him try. The worst part of all this is how it's divided the neighborhood. Most of us are united against Fred, but he's managed to win over a few people. There's this one lady down the street who keeps defending him, saying we should give him a chance. It's caused some real tension at block parties. Let me tell you, we've got this big HOA meeting coming up tomorrow where all of this is supposed to be hashed out. I'm not looking forward to it, to be honest. Fred's sure to make a scene, and I'm worried things might get heated. A couple of the current board members have had run-ins with him before, so they know what he's like. But there are also a few new faces running for election who don't know the whole story. I've been trying to gather as much information as I can before the meeting. I've got copies of our bylaws, property plats, and even printouts of Virginia's laws about felons voting. I'm hoping that if we present all the facts, people will see reason and shut down Fred's power grab. But you know what? Even if we manage to keep Fred off the board, I'm worried this is just the beginning. He doesn't seem like the type to give up easily. I have a feeling we'll be dealing with his antics for a long time to come. In the meantime, we're all just trying to go about our lives as normally as possible. But it's hard, you know. Every time I see a car slow down on our street, I tense up wondering if it's Fred. I hate feeling like this in my own neighborhood. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually considering moving if things don't improve. It's a shame because we love our house and most of our neighbors are great. But the stress of dealing with Fred and his schemes is just too much sometimes. So yeah, that's where things stand right now. We're all holding our breath, waiting to see what happens at tomorrow's meeting. I'm hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. Wish us luck. We're going to need it. The day of the big HOA meeting finally arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to be on edge, and I could see small groups of people huddled together, whispering and glancing around nervously. I had spent the morning gathering my documents and making sure I had everything I needed to present our case against Fred. I was determined to make sure he didn't get a foothold in our community. As I walked into the community center where the meeting was being held, I could see Fred standing near the entrance, chatting and laughing with a few of his supporters. He had this smug look on his face, like he knew something we didn't. It made my blood boil, but I tried to stay calm and focused. The meeting started with the usual formalities, but it wasn't long before the topic of Fred's new HOA board came up. The current board members looked visibly uncomfortable as they addressed the issue. They explained that they had received numerous complaints from residents and that they were aware of Fred's criminal background. They also mentioned the bylaws and the legal restrictions regarding felons serving on the board. Fred, of course, wasn't having any of it. He stood up and started ranting about how he was being unfairly targeted and how he just wanted to make positive changes in the community. He claimed that the current board was corrupt and that they were trying to keep him out because they were afraid of what he might uncover. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting over each other, and it was hard to make out what anyone was saying. Some of Fred's supporters were yelling about giving him a chance, while others were demanding that he be removed from the neighborhood altogether. It was a complete mess. I finally managed to get the floor and presented the documents I had gathered. I showed the bylaws, the property plats, and the printouts of Virginia's laws about felons voting. I tried to stay calm and factual, but it was hard not to let my frustration show. I pointed out that Fred's actions had been disruptive and that he had been harassing residents. Fred's supporters tried to argue back, but it was clear that the majority of the room was against him. The board members took a vote, and it was decided that Fred's new HOA board was not legitimate and that he would not be allowed to serve on the board. Fred was furious. He stormed out of the meeting, shouting threats and promising that this wasn't over. His supporters followed him out, and the room slowly started to calm down. I felt a sense of relief, but I knew that this wasn't the end of it. Fred wasn't the type to give up easily, and I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of him. In the days following the meeting, things started to return to normal, but there was still an underlying tension in the neighborhood. People were wary, and there were still occasional sightings of Fred skulking around. We continued to warn each other when we saw him, and we made sure to keep an eye on our properties. One afternoon, I was out in the yard when I saw Fred's car slowly drive by. I tensed up, wondering if he was going to stop and cause more trouble. But he just drove on, glaring at me as he passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. A few days later, my neighbor came over to tell me that Fred had been seen talking to a lawyer. Apparently, he was planning to sue the HOA for discrimination. I couldn't believe it. After everything he had done, he was still trying to cause trouble. The news spread quickly, and the neighborhood was once again on edge. We held another meeting to discuss our options and to make sure we were prepared for whatever Fred might throw at us. The board members assured us that they had consulted with their own lawyers and that they were confident we were in the right. But it was still a stressful time for everyone. As the weeks went by, there were more sightings of Fred and his supporters. They would drive by slowly, sometimes stopping to take pictures of our properties. It felt like we were being watched, and it was incredibly unnerving. I hated the feeling of not being able to relax in my own home. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with my wife, trying to unwind after a long day. We were talking about the situation and wondering what Fred's next move would be. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from across the street. We jumped up and ran over to see what had happened. It turned out that Fred had driven his car into my neighbor's fence. He was stumbling around, clearly drunk, and shouting incoherently. My neighbor was already on the phone with the police, and within minutes, they arrived and took Fred into custody. The incident was a turning point for the neighborhood. People were fed up with Fred's antics, and the police presence seemed to give everyone a sense of relief. Fred was charged with DUI and property damage, and it looked like he would finally face some consequences for his actions. In the weeks that followed, things started to improve. Fred was no longer seen around the neighborhood, and his supporters seemed to have backed off as well. The tension slowly began to dissipate, and we were able to start focusing on rebuilding our sense of community. We held a block party to celebrate, and it was the first time in months that I felt like we could relax and enjoy ourselves. People were laughing and chatting, and it felt like the neighborhood was finally starting to heal. As I stood there, watching my neighbors come together, I realized how much this whole ordeal had brought us closer. We had faced a common enemy and had come out stronger on the other side. It wasn't the way I would have chosen to build a sense of community, but it had worked nonetheless. Just when things seemed to be settling down, we got word of Fred's latest and most serious run-in with the law. It happened late one night when he was pulled over for erratic driving. According to the police report, Fred was clearly intoxicated and became belligerent when the officers tried to administer a breathalyzer test. Things escalated quickly. Fred, in his drunken state, took a swing at one of the officers. It was a big mistake. The cops wrestled him to the ground, but Fred kept fighting, kicking and punching wildly. It took 3 officers to finally subdue him and get him into handcuffs. The charges were serious: DUI, resisting arrest, and multiple counts of assaulting a police officer. Given Fred's prior record, the judge threw the book at him. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. With Fred behind bars, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the story wasn't over yet. Unable to keep up with his mortgage payments while in prison, Fred's house went into foreclosure. The bank took possession and put it up for sale. It was a strange feeling watching the "for sale" sign go up in front of Fred's house. On one hand, it felt like the final chapter in this whole ordeal. On the other, it was a sobering reminder of how quickly someone's life can spiral out of control. The house eventually sold to a nice young family who seemed eager to be part of the community. As for Fred, last we heard, he was still serving his sentence, with no possibility of parole for at least 5 years. With Fred gone and the drama finally behind us, the neighborhood started to heal. We focused on rebuilding the sense of community that Fred had tried so hard to tear apart. We organized more block parties, neighborhood cleanups, and even formed a neighborhood watch to ensure that everyone felt safe and secure. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much turmoil one person could cause. Fred's actions had brought us all together in ways we never expected. We learned to stand up for ourselves and each other, and we became a stronger community as a result. As I sit on my porch now, watching the kids play in the street and neighbors chatting over fences, I can't help but feel grateful. Grateful that we came together, grateful that we stood our ground, and grateful that Fred's reign of chaos has come to an end. The neighborhood feels like home again, and I'm hopeful for the future. In the end, it was a long and winding road, but we made it through. Fred may have tried to take us down, but we emerged stronger and more united than ever. Here's to hoping that the peace we found lasts for years to come. You should figure out how many people he has supporting him, then make sure that all contested seats have more votes than he can get. So, if he has 10 votes, each seat should get 11 votes. Get proxy votes to help with this if allowed and possible. In the long term, remove unapproved items from the common area, which should include cameras and posters. I am not sure how things work in your state, but everything that I have heard indicates that all homeowners can vote in HOA matters. That could just be the rules in my area. You should make sure that you can stop him from voting. HOAs are typically nonprofit companies. There isn't stock, but all homeowners are members. This will matter when it comes to voting and being on the HOA board. Honestly, this story highlights just how quick people are to judge without understanding the full picture. Yes, Fred has a troubled past, but everyone deserves a shot at redemption. The HOA should have given him the opportunity to prove himself instead of jumping to conclusions based on his criminal record. It's not like he was trying to take over the world. He just wanted to be part of the community. The way the neighborhood ganged up on him is pretty sad. Maybe if they had shown a little compassion, things wouldn't have escalated the way they did. People can change, and it sounds like Fred was trying to do just that. Instead, they pushed him to the edge, and now he's in prison for years. It's a lose-lose situation for everyone involved. Sometimes, a little understanding and empathy can go a long way. Are you kidding me? Fred sounds like a total nightmare. This guy has a history of armed robbery, DWIs, and domestic violence, and people still think he deserves a spot on the HOA board. Give me a break. The neighborhood did the right thing by standing up to him. It's not about being judgmental. It's about protecting the community from someone who clearly can't follow the rules. He was trespassing on people's property, tearing up lawns, and even got into a fistfight with the cops. How much more evidence do you need that this guy is bad news? The fact that he ended up in prison for assaulting police officers just proves the point. The neighborhood is better off without him, and it's a relief that the bank took back his house. Good riddance. Sometimes, you have to draw a line and say enough is enough. Kudos to the writer and their neighbors for standing their ground. Fred sounds like a menace. The neighborhood had every right to be on edge. His criminal record alone should have been a red flag, but his actions in the community were even worse. Trespassing, tearing up lawns, and getting into fights with the police? No thanks. The HOA did the right thing by keeping him off the board. It's unfortunate that he ended up in prison, but he brought it on himself. The community is safer and more peaceful without him. Sometimes, you have to protect your home and your neighbors from people who refuse to change. End of story.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.